Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, 5 Barriers to Effective Training Programs and How to Crush Them. My name is Jessica. I'm on the marketing team with BizLibrary, and I'll be the host for today's session. Before we get started, I want to go through just a couple of housekeeping items pretty quickly. First, what you should see on your screen. On the left-hand side of the screen, this is the webinar viewer. So this is where you'll see the content that we're sharing with you today. On the right-hand side of the screen, this is the control panel. So this is where you can join the audio portion of today's webinar, and you can also communicate with us through the question box. The default mode for the control panel is for it to collapse. If you want to open the control panel back up, simply click the orange box with the white arrow in it, and it'll expand for you. All of today's attendees are in listen-only mode, so you can join the audio portion of today's webinar either through the teleconference line. You can also listen through your speakers. If you're going to listen through your speakers, I recommend either using a pair of headphones or a headset to get the best audio quality. I like to keep things pretty informal, so if you have any questions or discussion points, feel free to send those over through the question box that's located within the control panel. I like to weave them in as it relates to what we're discussing in the webinar, and then I'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A. I am recording the session today, so I'll make a link to the webinar recording, as well as the slides and follow-up information on our blog after today's session. So that's bizlibrary.com/bizblog. Also, if you'd like to download the slides for today, before we get into the content, I put a link to those in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You should have also received a link to the slides in the reminder email that you received this morning. Happy to say that today's session has been approved for 1 hour CE credit for all of you HR professionals attending. I'll make a link to the completion certificate available at the end of today's session. I'll also email out a link to the certificate and a follow-up email that you receive within 24 hours. The most important thing is the program ID number or the activity ID number. That's what you'll need to record with HRCI. If you'd like more information on certification or recertification, I encourage you to visit hrci.org. Again, my name is Jessica. I'm on the marketing team with BizLibrary. I graduated from the University of Missouri-Columbia with a degree in journalism. I'm working in the training and development industry now for about 5 years. I'm very active in social media, so I tweet on behalf of BizLibrary at BizLibrary and also at my own account at Jess L. Petrie. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so I like to share a lot of articles and discussions around human resources, training and development, and marketing. So if you're on either of those networks, would love it if you'd reach out and connect. Presenting with us today is Chris Osborne. Chris is the VP of Marketing for BizLibrary. He's also worked in a consulting capacity with a Paris-based leadership development consulting firm where he helped organizations design and implement leadership and executive development programs. He's been performing learning development and training functions formally since 2000 and informally for organizations since 1987. Prior to Chris's move into the business sector, he practiced law in the areas of labor, employment, and business litigation for over 12 years. He graduated from WashU School of Law with honors in 1987. You can also find Chris on social media, so he's on Twitter at Chris Osborne STL, and he's also active on LinkedIn. So sure, he'd love it if you'd reach out and connect as well. Just to give you a quick background on BizLibrary, we're a leading provider of online employee training and e-learning solutions. Our award-winning content library includes more than 7,000 online employee training videos covering every business training topic. So that includes communication skills, leadership and management, sales and customer service, compliance training, desktop computer skills, and more. Additionally, BizLibrary's LMS, or Learning Management System, and social learning technology platform help HR and training leaders improve and manage employee learning. All right, so enough about us. I actually have a quick kind of informal poll question just so we can have correct reporting. So those of you that are attending through a tablet, mobile device, or the GoToMeeting app, if you can just let me know through this quick poll, that way I can make sure that we have everything recorded correctly. They've had some issues with getting the attendees reported correctly. So I'll leave this open for just a couple of seconds, and then I have another poll question that'll kick off more of the content for today. Just a couple of seconds, and I'll close it up. All right, great. Thanks, guys. All right, so this next poll question, what is the biggest barrier you personally have faced related to learning and development on the job? Is it A, lack of resources and time, B, lack of motivation to change or improve, C, training doesn't make an impact. E, performance isn't improved. Or D, lack of support from senior leaders.
Hey, Jessica, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I
Good.
forgot to warn you, I'm having a froggy voice today.
That's quite all right. I'll pitch in if needed, or if you need to get, hopefully you have a drink nearby. A non-alcoholic drink. It is a Thursday, I guess. No, I'm kidding.
I do have a drink nearby. This is,
Okay, good.
and by the way, we recognize that the answer to this poll question could be all of the above. We're just curious as to your biggest barrier. So we know that this is a kind of a multifaceted question. So.
Yeah, I'll leave it open for just a couple of more seconds, and then I'll share the results. All right. Looks like we've got 58% of lack of resources and time, 20% lack of support from senior leaders, 14% lack of motivation, 4% training doesn't make an impact, and 4% performance isn't improved.
Well, and I recognize that the lack of resources and time could be caused by a range of those things. But interesting that that dominated the poll results so much. That's I don't know that I remember. We've done this webinar a few times, but I don't remember that that specific barrier dominated the results at quite that level. Do you? I really don't remember that.
Yeah, no, I would say the highest it's been is probably maybe upper 30s, like maybe like 38%. Last time we did this, the highest one was actually, or maybe the second highest was training doesn't make an impact, which I was personally surprised by, but you weren't. But it, it varies from audience to audience and attendees, so it's definitely interesting.
Well, it's, yeah, and one of the things that we're going to talk about as we get into the barriers that we see, and actually some of these are, will tie into that poll question, is it is different. The barriers will be different and will look and feel different based upon culture and organization to organization. So interesting poll results. I have to say that is a fascinating fascinating bit of content there. So really neat. Thank you all very much for participating. We really appreciate that. Always a good place to start the conversation.
Yeah, Chris, I'm going to pass the ball over to you. We have 3 high-level things that we're going to hopefully discuss with you today. So you should see.
And hopefully you see that. You see them?
Yep, we are good to go.
Perfect. Okay, so Jessica's right. We're going to talk about 3 kind of high-level pieces of the barriers. I want to talk about the strategic framework for effective learning and development programs. And this is really important because we need to understand sort of where and how effective learning and development programs look and reside in organizations, because then the barriers, the 5 barriers that we're going to talk about, will, I think, make a lot more sense. And there are 5 common ones, and we've got some really interesting material and resources, a really fascinating blog post to share that really helps bring some clarity to these. And then we're going to talk about, as we go through the barriers, we're going to suggest what we see as some best practices about how to overcome them. One of the having been in this space for a long time, I can tell you, at least my personal experience has been, each one of these barriers can seem really overwhelming. I mean, you run into these, and it's very easy to throw your hands up and kind of go, okay, we can't do this, it's not going to happen. And that's a natural reaction to each one of these, to be perfectly honest. But don't do that. And I have to confess, I'll raise my hand on this one. If I was in a big room meeting with all of you, I'd say, okay, how many have done that? I would raise my hand. But there really are strategies and things that you can do, practical things that you can do. And I'm not talking pie in the sky kind of, feel-good step measures that make us feel better for our effort, but practical things, steps that you can implement right away to begin to move around these barriers. So let's talk about the framework, the things that are happening around our organization, both around and inside. Every day, this is the big data that's going on. Every day we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. Now that's so much that 90% of the data in the world's been created in the last 2 years alone. I have no idea how many zeros a quintillion is, but it's a lot more than a million. Remember, it's a lot. It's staggering. But and then you've got this, the sort of blend of behaviors, technology, and this is a generational thing. This is sort of the rise of the millennials. You know, they're really tied to video as a communication and information sharing modality. But 6 billion hours of video are watched each month on YouTube. That's almost an hour for every person on Earth. Now just let that wash over you for just a second and think about all the different channels that we now have available to us to access YouTube. Now, even 3 to 5 years ago, it was primarily desktop and laptops, some cell phones, I mean the emergence of some smartphones, but primarily then it was 3G access, so it was kind of clunky and slow. 3G networks weren't all over the place. Now we've got, you know, higher speed networks and devices, frankly, tablets, iPads, you know, Android tablets as well, that have a lot better capability. So now YouTube, video on YouTube, is far more accessible, which is creating this blend of technology, behaviors, and just the preferences of a lot of people, with a big emphasis on millennials, for accessing information this way. So we have to think about this blend of all these things creating a framework for how we think about learning and development. And there's this whole bring your own device movement. It's real common, real recent studies. I mean, this is not something that's been going on for very long. Cisco released a BYOD Insights report in 2013, and 9 out of 10 Americans who bring their smartphones to work, who have smartphones, use them for work, and most of them use their smartphones for work-related purposes. It's not looking at funny kitten videos. Well, that probably happens. It's not just for looking at sports scores or watching the World Cup, but people are using their devices to access work-related information. Now step back about that for just a second, because I think this is a really important trend to understand, because you know the world is tilted in terms of comfort, use, and accessibility of information on the web away from desktop computing to laptop, and now to a strong preference towards really portable devices, smart devices, tablets and cell phones. And we really are in a world where we have access at our fingertips, true, anytime, anywhere information. I heard a speech at our client conference last year by Michael Rochelle. We're going to share some information from him, a little bit different information. And he said that the most powerful innovation in smart technology wasn't the device, but it was web browser capability. Because it was when web browsers really became effective on phones, that's when they turned them into really something powerful. And he's right, if you think about it. And you have this beautiful device, this artfully designed device that lets you access music libraries, and you can load apps and do all kinds of things. But it wasn't until you could really seamlessly connect to the web on these devices that we began to really understand the true power of a tablet or a smartphone. And our employees are ahead of us on this. They're going there because we're not there with them. And this is an important part of this strategic framework that we need to be thinking about for employee development. And then you just have the demands of the workplace are changing right in front of us. This is not a surprise to anybody here. If you're at this webinar, you are engaged in employee learning and development, so this research isn't going to surprise anybody. Robert Kelly at Carnegie Mellon University published the first round of this research. I believe it was in 2002. I'd have to dig into my notes to confirm that, but I believe it's in 2002. And in 1986, Kelly found that we held about 2/3 to 3/4 of all the information we need to effectively perform our jobs within our brain. By 1997, just 11 years, but if you think about the rise of .com, all the technology advances at that time, the rise of IT, it had shrunk to, I think it was 15%. So huge, huge changes. And by 2006, it's down to 6 or 8%. The number's got to be lower today. So think about that for just a second. Now, if we are training our employees using sort of best practices training, kind of a linear approach with push training, heavy emphasis on classroom delivery, that really works well in a 1986 world, but probably not so well in a 2006 and certainly a 2014 world when employees just simply cannot retain enough information in their brain to do their job effectively. They need to access that information in much, much different ways, which leads to that. It's a natural extension of the complexity and speed with which jobs have to work today. So then we've got the final piece of this strategic framework, and that is what executives expect of us. And this hasn't changed that much over the years, but this was some interesting data published by Patty and Jack Phillips. And Phillips is famous. He kind of added to the Kirkpatrick ROI methodology. You know, Kirkpatrick has the four levels of evaluation. Phillips added that 5th level. So a great contribution to the discussion about how to measure the impact of training. And this is what executives ranked from 1 to 8, forced rank, 1 to 8 on what they're looking for. And this is the percentages in the right-hand column, or what's actually being measured. And this is some research published in CLO magazine in 2010. And by the way, this hasn't shifted much in 4 years. The organizations still aren't doing a particularly good job of this. But executives wanted, their most important thing was impact. They wanted to see the actual impact of learning and development programs on the bottom line. But only 8% of organizations were doing that. The 5th level, which is what Phillips contributed, was value, and only 4% of organizations are doing that. And then if you look through the rest of it, look at the most frequently measured activity. It's activity, 94% of organizations capture that. Efficiency, 78% capture that. And those are 6th and 7th on executives' mind share. Interesting, isn't it? So again, this is the framework that we're dealing in. And you know, this is we use this as sort of a lead-in to a blog post that we put together about strategies, and it's sort of inspired by a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. If we just put a great employee training program together, well, the employees will love it. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We have to approach training and development differently, and we have to begin to think of it within a strategic framework and begin to work carefully about addressing these barriers, finding them, and moving around them. I mentioned Michael Rochelle earlier. I love this quote. In a world of learning and development where complexity is the enemy, organizations need a simple and nimble approach to delivering high-quality learning anywhere, anytime. Keep that concept in mind as we talk about these barriers. Complexity is the enemy. This is a theme that I think is worth repeating and really keeping top of mind as we go through this. So here they are. These are what we see as the 5 most common barriers in to effective learning and development programs. Efficiency, and we'll talk about it, give you a definition for that. The status quo, I mean, boy, how often have we seen that get in the way? Convenience, a training mindset, and the blog post where we picked that one up and what inspired that is a little provocative, and I do take some issue with some pieces of it, so I'll explain that in just a little bit. And then a big one, manager support. So there they are, efficiency, status quo, convenience, training mindset, and manager support. Jessica, before I move into these and we start working our way through them and talking about best practices to overcome them, are there any questions? Do you have any comments or anything to add?
We did get a question in relating to training and education. So is there a difference, for the context of this webinar, is there a difference between training and educating when we think of implication and application? Or I'm sorry, impact and application.
Well, that's a good question, and can you tell I'm stalling for a second here while I formulate a good response? I don't always use those two terms interchangeably. A lot of people do, and I know we're talking about effective training programs. So let me back up for just a second. We're using the term training programs here to define programs that are aimed at employee learning and development. And I would define education more, or educating, more along the lines of employee learning as opposed to simply training. Training is important, but training is kind of a subset of learning or educating. All right, so here's how I would separate the two. And I recognize that most organizations just think of training programs, but if you ask top-end learning and development professionals, they'll tell you that the objective of the training program is learning, if you really think about it. So here's how I think of training. Training is teaching employees how to perform routine, repetitive tasks. For instance, we get trained on how to use GoToMeeting. We get trained on how to use PowerPoint or applications that we use every day in our organization. We are engaged in education or learning when we learn effective communication skills aimed at improving performance. We're engaged in learning or education when we're building managerial or supervisory skills aimed at more complicated or complex outcomes. Jessica, I don't know if that's a good definition or not, but did that distinction make sense to you?
It did. You know, we got a similar question in a different webinar that we did, so I just went back and looked because there was a great ad from Randall on one of them. So he said, the way that he put it, he said, training is the what of learning and education is the why of learning. So I think that's pretty well said and simple. I think that gets to the point as well. I know, I should. I know, I should have grabbed that. I remembered that quickly. I found it, though.
That is a great explanation, and I have to tip my hat to Randall. That is a really good strategic explanation of it. So I apologize for stumbling around. We should have just put that quote up right away. Good catch. Okay, so let's talk about each one of these barriers and efficiency. This is really, you know, we're going to deal with these, I think, in the right order as well. I think this is something else that we want to make sure that we explain to you. This isn't something that we just sort of, you know, made up. I want to work our way through these because they do build, I think, an interesting narrative story as we go through this. And this was really inspired by a blog post that we found written by Charles Jennings. Now, Jennings' writings are not for the faint of heart, by the way. He is very provocative, and he uses some very direct language and not always complimentary language about the training and development profession and those of us that are passionate about this field. So go there and read with that caveat in mind. Now, he is passionate. I mean, really passionate about it, but he is very adamant about his opinions and that he is absolutely right. I don't always agree with him, but I would love to meet him sometime. So efficiency, and we're going to put our own take on some of this, so just a heads up on some of that. But efficiency is a fascinating piece of this, and what we're getting at here is there's a big focus frequently on inputs rather than outputs, and because you know, we're able to do this simply. We put together a learning strategy. We're going to have this much classroom training, this much online training, this many people offsite, and it's easy to fall into that trap. And what we want to encourage you to do is think differently about what is real learning efficiency. In other words, let's focus on outputs. What happens at the end of a program, or what is our true objective? So we want to focus on goals, outputs? What is it that people are gaining? Are they improving performance? We want to learn much more effectively how technology promotes effective and efficient the transfer of knowledge and improvement of skills across a broad cross-section of our organization. You know, technology is not our enemy. Technology is our friend. And we think we do a webinar about a new competency model for learning professionals, and we talk about technology literacy being a key component of that, and this is really where it comes into play. And technology literacy, the way we're using the term, is the ability to link technology tools to business results. That's at its highest level, that's what that's about. And for us in the learning space, it means that we understand clearly how all of the technology tools at our disposal can enhance and amplify the impact of the learning that we're trying to achieve. So that means learning platforms, social learning platforms, social media, delivery methodologies like desktop and mobile learning. So it's important for us to understand that because it really can make a big difference. And this build, borrow, buy, this is a fun little phrase that we use to remind us of the different ways we can get a hold of content. We can build it, and sometimes it's very appropriate to build our own content. We can buy it. We can partner with an organization, some unnamed organization you might be putting on today's webinar, for instance, that has a large collection of content. That might be a good partner. Or we can borrow content, find content for free that's out there that's usable, that we can be comfortable with. And you know, we have all of these complex structures and systems frequently in place in organizations. Going back to our mantra for today, complexity is the enemy. Do we need them? How can we simplify systems and structures? Simplicity is not easy. In fact, elegant simplicity is sometimes extremely difficult to get to. It takes time. It takes thought. It takes elegance of planning and a real in-depth understanding of what we're trying to accomplish and the ability to link organizational objectives to the individual needs and the performance gaps that we're trying to plug. But it is extremely important that we strive to eliminate the barriers between our employees and the content so that these complex systems and structures become much easier to navigate. And that, again, gets back to that effective use of technology. So, you know, one of the things that we picked up, there's a really interesting survey published by Coxie Learning Consultants, and it was their Learning Solutions Forecast for 2014. They polled, and they had 1,700 people respond to this survey, which was fascinating to me. But the top 4 learning solutions that the respondents to this survey were going to go out and acquire in 2014 were in this order. Off-the-shelf content, they identified that, the participants identified that as a learning technology, video-based training, then learning management systems, and then mobile learning. Really a fascinating sort of 4-piece element, sort of 4 pieces. And what I found most interesting about this is it's very possible to blend all of those together in a single solution. It's not, these are not mutually exclusive. So this was an interesting sort of eye-opener to me about where the market was at the end of 2013 in terms of what people were looking at as important. And if you think about that blend carefully, that is not a complex system. That is removing barriers and using technology efficiently. Anyway, it's a really interesting survey, some good work done by Coxie Learning Associates there. So why would video be an effective use of technology? Why video and e-learning? Well, there's a whole range of reasons that this can improve efficiency. Cost savings, reach, you can get more employees at lower cost, you can reduce travel, you can ensure productivity, minimize time away from work, kind of your standard value proposition for online content, just great stuff. And online learning makes a ton of sense. This is some data that we pulled from a U.S. Department of Education Office of Planning survey or report. You know, and you're going to have access to these slides, so I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but the research is clear as it can possibly be that, you know, access to online content is an incredibly efficient use of technology and a great way to reach your employees very, very well. And if you can make your approach to training efficient, make it collaborative, make it network-based and driven, and I'm also talking about sort of the human network-based and driven. If we can become content curators and creators, if our learning programs, our learning departments, and they are in fact becoming smaller and decentralized, organizations are flat with fewer managers and more specialists, and this is the way learning is going to look. This is kind of a good overall description of 6 characteristics that we see emerging in this space. Smaller, decentralized, flat, technology dependent, more collaborative than ever before. So this really ties into this idea of, learning to be efficient. Then the next piece of this, in terms of, increasing efficiency, people learn most of what they need to learn from others and informally. That's that 70-20-10 rule. And if we want to increase the efficiency of what we're doing, really work our way through that, this is a big, big piece of how to do that, is learn to harness the learning that's already going on around our organization. Informal learning. Help people understand what accountability truly means. Not just, you will learn this by this time, but by accountability, I mean empowering them to do these things and giving them the tools and resources to learn, helping people understand what it looks and feels like to work smarter and to be continuous learners, and that we as learning professionals model the behaviors that we expect others in the organization to undertake. That is, we model what continuous learning looks like. We're curious. We're finding new resources and sharing them, and we do all these things with an aim at getting the right people and right tools in the right places so we can deliver learning on time in the right way. All right. Jessica, anything to add to any of that?
Nope, Chris, I think we're good to go on to the next barrier.
The status quo. This is a barrier to all kinds of corporate initiatives, not just learning, right? This is a great quote from Seth Godin. He's a best-selling author. Whatever the status quo is, changing it gives you the opportunity to be remarkable. It's from his book, Tribes. And there's just, having been in consulting and change management and status quo, it comes from 2 places. There's inertia, just the, once an object is set in its place, it's hard to get it moving. And a lot of organizations there's just a risk aversion. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just reality. So we have to make people understand that there are also risks associated with retaining the status quo. Our competitors can move ahead of us. Things can happen. Innovations can outpace us. We can lose market share. There are risks associated with the status quo. So we have to, approach all learning and development as change management. And if you think about it, that's exactly what it is. We're trying to help employees in the organization go from one state of behavior to an improved state of behavior. We're trying to change. We're trying to improve. So we have to accept that processes and systems are difficult to change. So we have to adopt that that's the case. And one big impediment, at least in our space, is the training and development industry itself. We're saddled with legacy technologies and legacy thinking that has held us back in many ways. And this is a great illustration. The ASTD, or now ATD, this was their newest set of core competencies that was released in 2013, and there they are: business skills, global mindset, industry knowledge, interpersonal skills, personal skills, and technology literacy. This is the first time technology literacy was elevated to the core competency. It had appeared further down, but it wasn't considered critical, and ATD remains very, very focused on instructor-led classroom training. It's not bad, it's not good, but that's just where it is. And then if you think about industry leaders in the technology space, they are, forever wed to flash technology, traditionally learning large, not very agile systems. The industries just lag behind. Well, here's a different way to think about a set of competencies, a different status quo, or a move to something different for learning and development professionals. We need to have collaboration as a core competency. Networking, we need to become serial networkers, be the connective tissue in our organizations. Leadership skills, where's leadership? and the other. We need to be leaders, not necessarily formal leaders, but informal leaders. We have to help people move from one state of performance to another. Good presentation skills. I mean, how many of us have been bored to death by a lousy presentation? And digital literacy. This is absolutely a non-negotiable in this technology-driven world. You know, this is a great quote from Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. And that's frequently what change feels like, isn't it? And there's some, oddly enough, there's some wisdom in this. Change does take an enormous amount of effort. But, you know, if we can begin to change our culture, shift our culture into a true learning culture, there is, at its root, bottom line business benefits. Burson by Deloitte published an amazing bit of information back in, I think it was 2012, but they found that organizations with strong learning cultures significantly outperform their peers in all of these critical areas. They're 46% more likely to be first to market, 37% more productive, and look at that last one, 17% more likely to be market share leaders. I mean, this is the bottom line. You know, you're looking for that business impact, business benefit, that level 4, level 5 in the Kirkpatrick Phillips model. Here you go. This is the impetus to get senior level support for employee learning and development, really educating our employees to perform better. This is the reason to do it. You want to move the status quo? That's how you do it. Yep, everybody hates change, but if you can convince your CEOs that there's a true business benefit to do it, you can get there. This is a great cartoon. To be an effective leader, you need patience, strength, insight, tenacity, and courage. If that doesn't work, bribe them with donuts. Absolutely true. But L&D, we have to take on a leadership role in this. John Kotter, who I still think is one of the greatest writers ever on change, 70% of change initiatives fail. And there's a whole range of reasons for it, but don't let yourself fall into that. But it requires, at its core, a holistic view of what the organization needs and an unfailing commitment to follow through on what you're doing. Kotter wrote a book a number of years ago that I still think is the best book ever written on change, called Leading Change. And go get it, read it. It's absolutely brilliant. The advice in that book is still the best I've ever seen on how to lead change initiatives within an organization. So great stuff. Okay, so the third of the 5 barriers, convenience. And this is one where I think Charles Jennings hit a total and complete bullseye. And I have been a part of this myself. I am embarrassed to admit that I've fallen prey to this one and been a part of these exact kind of conversations before. He refers to convenience. He described a conspiracy of convenience. And let me describe it. I'm going to do my best to paraphrase the way he does it. But he talked about, you know, you have a manager that comes to you, and they tell you, well, we're having communications challenges on my team, and you're the training manager. You say, okay, so you put together a communications training program, and you go into the team, and maybe it's a 2-month program. You do, you know, a couple of classes, some workshops, some sessions, some meetings. You provide an online couple of courses, and, you know, 2.5 months later, everybody's patting themselves on the back, and hey, we got the training done. Isn't that convenient? And then 6 months later, there's been no improvement. And that's what he refers to as a conspiracy of convenience. Because what is going on there, this gets back to that first thing I was talking about. It was a focus on the input. There was no focus on the output, the objectives, what was really going on. Nor was it a real effort to think about what was really the objective of the team, nor was there an effort to really analyze the difference between the current level of performance, the desired level of performance, and the root cause of that difference. If that had occurred, who knows what the training had been on? Who knows what the education and learning program might have looked like? But instead, they just threw training at a challenge or a problem and hoped it was going to get better, but there was no alignment in that scenario with the organization's strategic goals. It was just aimed at, we're just going to toss some training at the problem. So at the end of the year, that team manager says, oh yeah, we got support from training. Chris and his team came in and did a great job with that communications training. But where's the outcome? Where's the improved performance? Where's what we needed? Where's what happened? Well, one way to get around that, and this is a great way to end that sort of conspiracy of convenience, is to learn to conduct a root cause analysis. And a root cause analysis isn't anything real magic or real, mysterious. Jessica, we're in good shape on time here, so let's run through an example of one for everybody. Do you mind?
Sure, happy to.
Okay, so what we've got, we're going to set this up for everybody. We've got a strategic performance challenge. We want to improve client retention by 5% on the client services team, okay? So I'll start here. So why are we not retaining clients at our target of 90%? We're only at 85%.
Well, the reason we're not retaining clients is because we don't talk to our clients enough, maybe once every 60 to 90 days.
Why is that a problem?
Well, we've learned that when we talk to clients at least once every 30 days, they renew their contracts at a rate of over 92%.
Well, why do the client services professionals not reach out to clients every 30 days?
Well, honestly, they have too many clients. Even for those that have a manageable number of clients, they don't always have relationships with the people that they need to, so the key decision makers at the company. So most reps have 80 or more clients, and we find the optimum number is about 50.
Well, wait a minute. So why is having a relationship with the key decision maker important? Does that have any impact on client retention?
Yeah, actually it does. We've learned that it's not just the frequency of contact that matters. When we have a good relationship with the decision maker, the renewal rate's 92%. When we communicate every 30 days and have a relationship with the decision maker, the renewal rate jumps to 96%.
Okay, so why do the reps have too many clients?
Well, not all of them do. We had turnover recently, and I expect to add a new rep within 30 days. In 60 days, the book of business should be balanced and manageable for the whole team.
All right, so why do we not have good relationships with the decision maker at each and every client?
Well, the reps, as a group, they're really not adept at relationship building and really establishing strategic partnerships.
Okay, so there you go. That's a root cause analysis. What we did is I kept asking why. Why? And what we ended up with there were actually two root causes. One is a learning and development challenge. The other is a business problem. The business problem is each rep has too many doggone clients. We need to hire a new rep to spread the book of business out. The other is the reps need learning and development support to improve their performance on understanding how to build strategic relationships. Now, if we had just gone at this and said, going back to our conspiracy of convenience, well, let's just provide customer service training, would we have gotten a change in performance that we were looking for? Probably not. But Jessica, as the customer service manager, might have gone, hey, thanks for that training. It was really great. Everybody really loved it. But at the end of the day, we might not have changed our client retention rate at all. So that's what we're talking about with the root cause analysis. You just keep asking why until you can't ask why anymore. And when you get to that level, you're there. You got it. That's the reason. That's the root cause. Sometimes it takes 5 to 7 levels to get down to the why. But the key thing here is we identified a pair of root causes, one of which is business process related, the other of which was a learning and development problem. That's how you avoid that convenience issue. Okay, so the fourth of the 5 challenges is what Jennings refers to as a training mindset. And this is the one, his language, that I take the biggest issue with. So I really would rather use some different language. So I'm going to tackle this a little bit differently. But the part of this that I do think is extremely valuable, and I love this graphic that Jessica put here because this is what it feels like. We end up, on this gerbil wheel. And it really is a need to change the focus from inputs, training inputs, to performance improvement. If you think about sort of traditional approaches to building a employee development strategy, sort of the way I was taught to do it. So we're gonna build a training program here, Chris. And so how much of this do you want to deliver in the classroom? How much of this do you want to do by hiring outside consultants to come in? How much of this can we get by sending our executives off-site? How much of this can do with outside coaches? And that was the approach. It was sort of like identify the inputs, the ways we're going to train, the modality of training, and then eventually it was online training and things like that. Sometimes there was on-the-job training involved, and but it was a real focus on inputs, the training content or the training delivery. And there was a big focus on the development of, and then trying to get at information about the content that we were inputting into the organization. I was never really taught to think carefully about the performance gaps that we were trying to fill. And that really is what has to change. So what I would plug in here is not a training mindset, but we need to move to a performance mindset. So the barrier is an input mindset. So what we want to do is make sure we're focusing on improved performance. So you begin by asking the right questions. Are we measuring the right things? What are we measuring? And if we're measuring the right things, we want to measure performance, not just activity, then we're getting ourselves closer and closer and closer to being able to answer the questions correctly. And this is where the Kirkpatrick levels, I think, really begin to help us immensely. A lot of people that, write and publish and talk about the Kirkpatrick levels kind of poo-poo levels 1 and 2. These are sort of the participant impressions. But you know what? You never, ever get to levels 3, 4, and 5 without favorable reactions to the content by the participants and an ability and a perception on the part of the participants that, hey, you know what, that participation in that content is actually going to improve my skills and that they're applying the skills to the job. So the Kirkpatricks have made a tremendous contribution to this space. So do not ignore those first 3 levels of the Kirkpatrick measure. The employee reaction, and I would measure that not just at the time of a training program, but 30 and 60 days out. And the same thing with the learning, at the time, 30 and 60 days out. And then that, are they applying the skills 30, 60, 90, 180 days out? And you got to teach your managers to support that. That's a really, really critical piece of this. So this is frequently what we see with this activity approach, going back to what I was talking about, the barrier. It's an activity, an input barrier. Training needed to increase revenues. We're going to do sales training. We're going to reduce turnovers. Okay, so this is a typical approach to it. But this is the way to begin to get at an output approach. Well, we want to increase revenue. Well, all right, by how much and in which areas? So you begin to identify the places where performance has to improve. And now you're in a better position to deliver the kind of content that can plug those performance gaps. So these are just some starters to get you thinking about that a little differently. Anyway, some great work there. Then the last, but certainly not the least important of the barriers, is manager support. So think about this relationship. No other relationship in your organization is repeated as frequently as the relationship between an employee and the manager. And no other relationship in your organization has more impact. This relationship impacts engagement, productivity, turnover, and the impact of your training. You have to teach your managers to support and be involved with training at every single step of the way. And your managers can help you do exactly this. Make your employees stakeholders. By the way, they're learning on their own already, whether you want them to or not. The problem is if you're leaving it completely up to them, They may be picking up content from who knows what sort of unvetted sources. So help your managers support this. Help your managers understand that this is an organizational mission. Teach your managers what the rules are of engagement, how they can engage employees, why playing to employees' strengths and coaching and teaching employees is important. Give employees and managers the tools and resources to be successful and access content when and where they need it. And teach your managers the value of and how to give continuous, effective feedback to employees so that the lessons of the learning are never lost, the lessons of the learning are continuously top of mind and being applied. One last thought I want to leave you with is a competency that we see emerging over and over and over called learning agility. And this is really a set of behaviors that helps people understand how to perform and make decisions in unfamiliar situations. It teaches them to draw on past experiences to work well in novel situations. This is the cover article in Human Resources Executive last year. It is a phenomenal piece of work. The thing that inspired me so much about this article was that the authors put learning and development professionals in a critical and central role in the success of organizations going forward in this marketplace, this environment that's described with the acronym VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's a great article. Highly encourage you to go take a look at it. So, key takeaways. We really need a different approach to learning and development if we're going to be successful and overcome these barriers. And at its foundation, it requires us to focus on performance. That's going to do a great deal to overcome all of the barriers. That's the starting point. So what are the barriers in your organization? If you're going to start with one, begin with manager support. It's the single most important factor to push success of your training programs forward or your learning and development programs forward. Begin with manager support. Build from there. And sometimes it's a change in culture, and you just have to recognize that change isn't always easy, but there are resources out there that can help you. Training and development resources, content collections, and partners like BizLibrary who I think can help you make a difference. Jessica, I'm going to get a drink and turn the presentation over to you for a few minutes, and then we'll take some questions.
Sounds good, Chris. That went fast, didn't it? Looks like we have some time for some questions. So send those over through the question box located within the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I also have some recommended resources for everyone. This first one is a course series. It's called How to Know What We Know. It includes 4 short videos. All of them are less than 10 minutes in length. But the idea with this series is that throughout your organization you have great ideas, great processes, great practices that could really be used to improve the overall business. The problem is nobody knows it. So this can be a great starter to get the conversation going about, where are some of our opportunities? What are our strengths when it comes to the context of training and learning development in your organization? This next course, it's another short video. It's called Leadership. It's a leadership lesson videos. You must ask the right questions to adapt. So this can be a great course to get your leadership team talking about what you need as an organization. So these courses and more are all included within the BizLibrary collection. Really our goal is to provide you the resources and support that you need to really remove those barriers that we talked about today and deliver a frictionless learning experience to your leaders and employees across your organization. So the collection has over 7,000 courses, so videos and e-learning courses, covers more than 25 topic areas, and it's set up to where your employees have unlimited access. So if you want to try out any of those resources that I recommended or any of the other resources in the collection, I'll put a quick poll up and just let me know if you're interested. All right, so Chris, question. We have a few questions in. So this one comes from Sharani. I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but what are some of the actual tactics you can recommend on some great new training techniques?
You know what? We've never had this question before, and it's a great one. I thank you very much. I've actually run across a couple of blog posts just in the past day and a half or 2 days on this very subject. So this is interesting that the question came up. And I've got a couple of tips for you. The first is to not lose sight of the power of storytelling. Narratives and stories in training are incredibly powerful and very effective. I mean, the human brain is kind of wired to remember stories. There's a great training program actually put on by ASTD or ATD called Telling Ain't Training by Howard Stolovich. I think I'm mispronouncing Howard's last name, but I attended his session many, many moons ago. But he talked about how the brain is wired to remember stories, and he gives some wonderful, wonderful examples. But putting your training into a narrative is massively helpful. So think about all the different topics that you have to train on. Customer service, sales, compliance. It doesn't make any difference what the subject is. If you can weave the lesson into a story that is relevant or fits into the actual experiences of the people that you're training, it really, really helps them tie it to their work and helps them remember. I still remember one moment I had when I was doing compliance training one time, and I was really having a difficult time getting this group of warehouse factory workers to understand why sexual harassment was important to their world. And it dawned on me, literally in front of the room, that I needed to link it to something that they could relate to, and I just popped out of my mouth to tie it to safety. And I asked them about, you know, what you would do if you saw somebody doing something dangerous with a forklift. And this one guy said, well, I'd tell them about it. And I connected a safe work environment with forklift loads to a safe work environment, and it was like light bulbs went off all over the room. But it was like a real eye-opener for me about the power of a narrative. So storytelling is big. Visuals, good visuals are another great training technique that I keep seeing over and over work well. There's a superb book called Slideology by Nancy Duarte that talks about how to tie visuals together. Another one is Flipping the Classroom. Jessica just put that up in chat. She's exactly right. That's a great technique, and there's a whole lot of great research online about how to do that. So those would be three things I'd recommend. Get married to narrative, get a good understanding of visual presentation of information, and do some research on flipping the classroom. Jessica, another question?
Good question. Yep, another one. We have one from Kathy. She asks, learning styles affect the ability to retain what's received during training. How can you improve that impact when you're dealing with so many different styles?
Yeah, good question. This is kind of a foundational one for all of us in this space. And this gets down to really good instructional design. And instructional design doesn't go out the window when we are, you know, using online training or doing classrooms or whatever it is. And you'll see that reflected, I think, in the BizLibrary collection. You know, we have 7,000 courses produced by 40-something different producers. And that's part of the reason we went for such a big variety. We have all kinds of different styles reflected for that very reason, because we have some people that react really well to sort of conceptual, very visual stuff. We have other people that react well with visuals, with verbal, you know, with the words, you know, bullet points, with, you know, visual reinforcement. We have other people that react very well to different approaches, scenario-based training. And so you just have to be very cognizant of the various ways in which people retain information, and continue to build your content regardless of how you're delivering it with that in mind. And it may require you to build the same content in different modalities in different ways, and provide job aids, follow-up job aids, you know, just a whole range of ways. But this also really gets, and Kathy, another thing that this really points out is the need to teach your managers how to reinforce the lessons of the training. Because if you can get your managers to help support the training after the fact, it becomes all of these various learning styles really begin to ratchet into place once your managers understand how to tie it together for you.
All right, great questions. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for today. For those of you that are attending for HRCI credit, I put a link to the completion certificate in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Just a reminder that I'll also send out a link to the certificate, the webinar recording, slides and follow-up information, and a follow-up email. So you should receive that in about 2 hours. We have 2 webinars next week. We have one on succession planning and the development of your high potentials. And we also have one on social leadership. So all upcoming webinars are on our website at bizlibrary.com webinars. So again, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Chris, for presenting with us, and hope you'll join us for a future webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Glad you could attend.